We switched speakers again today. Now we're back to Timothy, but we're still in Antioch. He says, "In the middle of the night, a wailing awoke me. A long, beseeching wail caused my stomach to seize and me to sit up shivering. The voice was the voice of my mother. I leaned forward on the pallet, cold, convinced I was a child in Lystra and that my mother was wailing for my father. In my heart's distress, I cried, 'Mama, Mama, where are you?' She didn't answer me. My father was dying, for hadn't I heard the wail of death's discovery? My mother was watching the bright fountain of blood which rose from my father's throat, and which, flowing down his bed like a crimson covering, was the flow of his visible life away. A second time I heard the wailing, this time with the words distinct through the doorways, 'Simeon! Oh, Simeon!' No, I wasn't in Lystra. I wasn't a child, though that baby sorrow lingered in me. 'Paul,' I whispered, 'Paul, did you hear that?' But the air in our bedroom was dead. I couldn't hear his breathing. I reached over to wake him and found his pallet empty. I stood up in the absolute blackness and crept toward the door. The whole house seemed to expand like lungs inhaling. Then the wailing was around me everywhere, sourceless. 'Simeon, take me with you. Simeon, I want to go with you.' Simeon, the old black man that leaned on his stick and invited Paul to stay with him. Outside the bedroom, I saw a faint light round a farther corner. Barefoot, filled with the grief of my father, I walked on carpets toward that light. I turned the corner, and in a bedroom no larger than ours, but lit by oil lamps on stands in the corners, I found my friend and teacher, Paul. He was kneeling at the left side of the bed, his tunic torn, his head larger and heavier than ever. Simeon's wife knelt at the right side. Simeon lay between. She was caressing her husband's dark forehead, leaning forward to kiss his face, pulling on his hand, pulling it in strengthless anger, bowing her head, burying her eyes in the palm of his hand. And Simeon was pliable to all her tugging. The force of will was not within him. His jaw was slack. His black skin had taken on a chalky pallor, especially at the lips. Simeon Niger was dead. I came carrying sorrow, and here was sorrow to companion my own. We were a family bound by sadness. Simeon's wife was the wife of my father, my own mother. Both women sang the same song, so that time collapsed and all death everywhere had become this one death. My friend and my teacher, Paul, was mute. Thoughts may have been roaring in his great head, but his eyes were fixed on Simeon, and his lips were pinched. His lips were bloodless, white, and pinched. I too knelt down. I touched the soles of the old man's feet. The toenails were thick and ridged. His ankle flesh was barky. He was a black man in whom I saw the image of my father, and I let the grief flow out of me. I began, as women do, to hum high in my nose in a fluteless falsetto to utter my lamentation. My humming increased. It caused the old woman to nod. She slumped low by the side of her husband and delivered herself to tears unhindered. But then I heard something like the cracking of sticks in angry rhythm with my music, and I saw that Paul was rocking to and fro, striking his bare breast with the flat of his hand. "Ah, my father," Paul said, crack. His eyes were red-rimmed, dry as hot as an oven. Ah, crack, crack. My father. His father, too. "This was a good man," Paul said. He raised his voice as if accusing someone. A good man, the best of men. This is the man who carried the cross of Jesus. This is the man who carried me. Then the room was still. Both mourners had pulled Simeon's arms toward themselves, stretching them wide apart. Paul, the right arm, gripping it. Simeon's wife, his left arm, weeping upon it. They looked alike, Paul and the woman. To my sad sight, they seemed like angels about to break for heaven, bearing the body between them. But finally I spoke. Woman, I said, where are your sons? Has somebody gone to tell your boys that their father is dead? Paul looked at me with incomprehension. Rufus, he said, as if I'd ask for their names. Alexander, he said. Where do they live? I said. How can I find their houses at night? The poor widow lifted herself and extended a hand toward me. I rose and took her hand. Thank you, Timothy, she said. The tenderness in her voice unmanned me. I could hardly stand such merciful kindness. Her husband was black, she was fair, and together they were the picture of grace in old age. Why couldn't they have died together, like Baucis and Philemon? She said, take our maid. She sleeps by the kitchen door. She will show you the way.